Hey everybody, I'm the comics teacher, and today we are going to be talking about some introductory comics basics. All right, welcome. So the National Council of Teachers of English, or NCTE, put out this graphic novel comics terms and concepts. It's only 2 pages long, teachers and students. It is available on my website, theothercomicbookteacher.com, under resources. You can find it there, you can save it, you can print it, you can do whatever you want. It's also on NCTE's website. I love this because teaching a comic is a lot like teaching or learning or reading a regular book, except there's a few extra things you can add to make the conversation deeper and richer. And today I'm going to demo and discuss 4 of these, and they all come from the layout section, which is the first section of the handout, and that is panel, frame, gutter, and bleed. So in a second, I'm going to cut the frame here. I'm going to go from an overhead view. I'm going to use this Firepower image comic number 1 to give you some basics and examples of, once again, panel, frame, gutter, and bleed, and then you can go ahead and use that however you want in your classroom or to analyze comics on your own. Because if we are going to talk about comics, we have to talk in the language of comics. And today, I'm here to bring you those 4 terms. Let's look at it in action. For this demo of going over comics, the basics layout, I am going to be discussing panels, frames, gutter, and bleed. And for this demo, I will be using Image Comics Firepower, the first issue, and then in a couple seconds, I'm going to go over and use the graphic novel for bleed, because in this book, there is not a lot of bleed in this first issue here. Actually, this comic is pretty basic in construction. I do really enjoy it, but it's also really good to talk about the comics basics because it does them very well. So the individual chunks of story on a comics page, the way the page is laid out, is called a panel. So this page, for example, has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 panels. And this last panel here is kind of like in the other panel. We'll talk about that in a minute. It's kind of a cool little panel construction, but each of these individual segments is called a panel. Surrounding the panel, we have what is called, you guessed it, a frame. So a frame, just like a picture frame, kind of goes around it. And you can see the little black lines here. This is very classic comic construction where you just have a panel, you have a black line around the panel, and then white, which is between the panels. The white in this particular case is called the gutter. The gutter is the space between the panels. So we have a panel, we have frames around the panel, and then we have the gutter, which is between the panels. Most of our thought process while reading comics comes in the gutter. It comes between the lines. What happens from here to here, we make the inference in the gutter. Now, I'm going to talk about a few things in this issue that kind of exemplify panel, frame, and gutter. And we can see this really cool panel down here with the dog who is eating a snack. And this is a neat little panel, offset, kind of overlapping another panel. This isn't bleed, which we'll talk about in a second. This is just a smaller panel overlapping another panel. Still has the black frame. It is kind of a cool just way to break up. This kind of little overlapping here would be a way that the artist and writer would break up the page a little bit. So as I scroll over here at the next page, one of the cool things I see here is we have our first example of a panel without a frame. There's a lot of kind of cool banter going on in this page. It's kind of a fun little interaction between a dad and a daughter, and the frameless panel here kind of breaks up the page. It breaks up the couple pages because then we're back to full panels with frames in the next page. Neat little way to break up what's going on. And it also shows us possibly that it's, not as serious. This is kind of a fun, easygoing scene, so we don't need to be as quote unquote inside the box while we are doing that, which is a cool way. So not all panels have frames. I guess it's kind of an invisible frame there. So just know that even though it doesn't have a frame, it is technically still a panel. All right. In a couple pages here, as you can tell, whoa, what's going on? There's black in the bleed in this page, right? So they're at the grocery store here, and we are shopping around, and our character here sees something he doesn't necessarily like, and then the gutter is black. A lot of comics will do this, where they will change the background of the page, what's between the gutter, to kind of indicate a tone. This is a really cool thing that they did here in Firepower issue 1 here, is to make that, so whenever you see this now in this book, whenever the background in the gutter changes color, that indicates a change in tone from maybe something a little more lighthearted to something a little bit more serious. All right, so I am going to switch gears and I'm going to break out the Firepower graphic novel, which came out before the book, before the single issues did. It was kind of like it's a prelude, as it says right here on the cover. I have a couple post-it notes here of things I want to talk about because we need to get into bleed. We talked about a panel, we talked about the frame, we talked about the gutter. What is bleed? Well, this book doesn't have a lot of bleed, but I did find a couple really cool examples, and both of them are with text. So here we have bleed. What is bleed? Bleed is when something in the panel goes outside of the panel. And we'll talk about this as this series goes on, as we talk more about comics and analyzing pages. But we have this wakram. What's going on here? All right. Don't make me say that again. This is popping out of the panel. That is called bleed. It is simply bleeding off of the panel into the gutter. Comic creators will do this in a variety of really cool, interesting ways. That is called bleed. Now, the only other one in this book I wanted to show you was this really cool one right here. I'm going to move my camera over a little bit. Actually, push it up here. So, there's a lot going on in this little town, this little area that's happening here, and there's something major happening, so they wanted to alert everybody. So we have these panels going down the page and a giant gong, a G-O-N-G with an exclamation point, bleeding here into these other panels. So this is called a bleed once again, with something breaking out of the panel and kind of going down the page. I love this giant yellow gong here because it indicates that that sound is massive. It's so big that it bleeds through all of the other stuff that is happening in the story at this time. So a quick recap for you today. We went over panel, which is the individual segments of a page on a comic. We have a frame, which is how we can describe how that panel is contained on the page. In this example, it is very clear, defined black lines for the most part. We have gutter, which is the space between the panel, which is where we make all of our inferences. And then we have bleed, which is when something like waram bleeds from the panel into the rest of the page. So there you have it, ladies and gentlemen. That is panel, frame, gutter, and bleed. I hope you took something away from this. I will be back next week to give you the next bunch of words from the handout, showing them to you in action. I hope you come back and learn more with me. Comics teacher, have a great day.